Inside the walls of a house, beneath the skin of a boat, inside a bathtub, a fishing rod, or a construction panel, the same material keeps quietly appearing. Most people never notice it, they simply live around it. That material is fiberglass, and at first that name sounds almost impossible. Glass is the thing we associate with shattered cups, cracked windows, and sharp, brittle edges. So how does something made from glass become strong enough to insulate homes, shape vehicles, and help build pieces of the modern world? What exactly is fiberglass? What is it made of? And what changed along the way? To understand fiberglass, we have to begin with the moment glass stopped behaving the way we expect it to. Let's get into it right here on Secrets of Simple Things. The story started long before modern industry. Fiberglass may sound like a modern industrial invention, but the idea behind it goes back much further. Long before it became insulation, boat hulls, or wall panels, people had already experimented with drawing molten glass into thin strands. In ancient times, those strands were mostly decorative. They were interesting, delicate, and visually unusual, but they were not yet a practical material. The idea existed before the use did. What changed was not curiosity, but control. In the early 20th century, industry finally made it possible to produce glass fibers in a more useful way. The real turning point came in the 1930s, when Russell Gaines Slater accidentally found a method for making glass fibers in bulk while researching insulation. That discovery gave fiberglass a future. During World War II, its combination of lightweight and strength made it useful in aircraft components. After the war, it moved out of military settings and into everyday life. It is not solid glass made softer. Fiberglass is not ordinary glass that has somehow been softened, stretched, or made flexible. At its core, it is exactly what the name suggests: extremely fine strands of glass. That detail matters more than it first seems. The important thing is not just the material, but the form the material takes. Instead of existing as one solid, brittle piece, the glass is divided into countless thin fibers. In many real products, those fibers are not used by themselves. They are usually combined with a resin, which helps turn them into a composite material. So fiberglass is not simply glass in a gentler mood. It is glass reorganized into a very different structure, one that can be shaped and used in ways ordinary glass cannot. And once you see it that way, the next surprise is where it begins, not with anything exotic, but with very ordinary minerals. From ordinary minerals to hair-thin fibers, fiberglass begins with ingredients that sound almost disappointingly plain: silica sand, limestone, soda ash, and a few other minerals. Heated to around 1,400 degrees Celsius, that mixture becomes a thick, glowing liquid. At that stage, it is still just molten glass. The real transformation happens when that liquid is pushed through tiny holes in a device often compared to a spinneret. What comes out is not a sheet, bottle, or pane, but strands so fine they can be thinner than a human hair. Those strands are cooled almost immediately and gathered together before they lose their form. That sequence matters because fiberglass is not simply glass that has been processed a little more carefully. It is glass forced out of its familiar shape and reorganized into filaments. The raw ingredients are ordinary, the heat is extreme, but the deepest change comes from structure. Glass is no longer being kept as a single solid body. It is being divided into an entirely different physical form. And that leads to the most important question in the whole story. Why does changing the form change the behavior so dramatically? Strength comes from reducing weakness. Glass in its usual form feels solid right up until the moment it fails. A cup, a bottle, or a window may seem firm and dependable, yet hidden inside that firmness are tiny imperfections, microscopic cracks, weak spots, and structural flaws too small to see. Those flaws are where stress gathers. Once force concentrates there, a fracture can spread quickly, and the whole piece gives way. That is what makes fiberglass so interesting. When glass is drawn into extremely thin strands, those weaknesses do not vanish, but they shrink. They become smaller, less dominant, and less able to control the fate of the whole material. A flaw that might help fracture a thick piece of glass has far less power inside a filament so fine that there is simply less room for a crack to grow and take over. The result feels almost backward. The glass has not become magically unbreakable, and its basic nature has not been rewritten. What changes is the scale of its weakness. Each individual fiber can end up much stronger than our instincts about ordinary glass would suggest. That is one of the quiet lessons inside fiberglass. Sometimes a material does not become stronger because its essence changes, but because its weaknesses become too small to dominate everything else. Not all fiberglass is the same. Once fiberglass became practical, it did not remain a single one-size-fits-all material. Different uses demanded different balances of strength, heat resistance, and chemical durability. One of the most common forms is e-glass, widely used in insulation and many general-purpose products because it offers a useful balance of cost, flexibility, and strength. There is also S-glass, which is stronger and more heat-resistant, making it better suited for aerospace and military applications where performance matters more than price. Another variation is C-glass, which is designed to resist chemical corrosion, so it works better in harsher environments. The details vary, but the principle stays the same. Thin strands of glass can be tailored for very different jobs. Glass fiber alone is not the whole story. Strong fibers are an important beginning, but they are still only fibers. On their own, they do not automatically become the shell of a boat, the skin of a panel, or the body of a useful product. For that, they need a partner. In many practical applications, glass fibers are combined with a resin that holds them together and turns them into a more stable structure. The resin binds the fibers into a unified form, protects the network, helps the material keep its shape, and allows it to be molded into specific products. This is the point where fiberglass becomes more than a collection of thin strands. It becomes a composite. The fibers contribute strength. The resin contributes cohesion, protection, and shape. Neither tells the whole story alone. Fiberglass becomes truly useful because these two parts work together, each solving a problem the other cannot solve by itself. The material that fits more jobs than you notice. Once you understand that partnership, it becomes much easier to see why fiberglass spread so quietly into everyday life. It did not win because it was glamorous. It won because it solved a practical combination of problems at once. It could be made light without becoming uselessly weak. It resisted moisture. It did not rust like metal. It handled a wide range of temperatures, and it could be shaped into forms that would be difficult or expensive with many other materials. That is why fiberglass appears in so many different places. In insulation, it traps pockets of air that slow the movement of heat and help buildings stay energy efficient. In construction, it shows up in panels, roofing materials, and reinforcement components because weather resistance matters almost as much as strength. In transportation, it helps reduce weight in car bodies, boat hulls, and even some aircraft parts. In boats, storage tanks, and other wet or corrosive settings, resistance to moisture becomes especially valuable. You also find it in ladders, bathtubs, storage containers, fishing rods, skis, and surfboards. These uses look different on the surface, but they keep returning to the same basic logic. Fiberglass fits wherever people need something light, durable, workable, and resistant to the environment around it. The risk depends on the form. When a material becomes this common, one question naturally follows: is it safe? In finished products, fiberglass is generally considered safe in normal use. In a boat hull, a wall panel, or a molded container, the fibers are usually sealed inside resin or another stable structure, so they are not freely escaping into the air or onto the skin. The main concern appears earlier, during manufacturing, cutting, installation, or repair. At that stage, tiny fibers can be released and become an irritant. They may bother the skin, the eyes, or the lungs, which is why workers handling raw or exposed fiberglass often wear gloves, masks, and protective clothing. So fiberglass is not dangerous in the same way at every moment. Its risk depends heavily on whether the fibers are contained or exposed, settled or airborne, finished or disturbed. More than just glass. Even in a world full of newer materials, fiberglass still matters because it reaches a balance that is hard to replace. It is cheaper than advanced composites like carbon fiber, yet still strong, versatile, easy to shape, and practical for large-scale manufacturing. It is not the flashiest material in the room, and on paper it is not always the most impressive. But the materials that endure are often the ones that solve many problems at once without becoming too expensive, too specialized, or too difficult to use. That is what makes fiberglass more interesting than its name suggests. It is not simply glass with a different label. It is a reminder that a familiar material can become something almost entirely different when its structure changes, its form changes, and the way it is combined changes too. What begins as ordinary minerals becomes molten glass, then filaments finer than hair, then a material that ends up inside walls, boats, vehicles, and industrial equipment. On the surface, fiberglass sounds simple. Look more closely, and it becomes a story about how changing the shape of a material can change what that material is able to become. If this video changed the way you see something as ordinary as fiberglass, subscribe to Secrets of Simple Things for more stories hiding inside the materials, objects, and habits we usually pass by without a second thought. And if there is another everyday thing you want us to uncover next, leave it in the comments. Your suggestion might become the next story.